short sell. And the short sell was aimed at 30 companies in Europe because Europe was the one who financed America, and they were not getting their money back. And after we were in World War I, we became a war-bearing country. We started manufacturing war goods. We started doing things all pertinent to war and took a lot of jobs and revenue out of Europe, who did that prior to us being involved. And Europe was screaming that they weren't getting their money back, blah, 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 blah. So they created what they call a short sell, and on the stock market. And Joe Kennedy orchestrated it, and it worked exceedingly well. What they didn't count on was when they took a couple days off to come back and finish it, the country panicked, and it caused a crash. They didn't do it specifically to make the crash. It just was a remnants of it. But Joe Kennedy came out of it as a very wealthy man with a lot of property and stuff that he had absconded with out of the. So when it was over, then they said, wow, you did such a great job. Now we want you to be ambassador to England. And, he was going to become Ambassador Joe Kennedy. But why he got that is because after the crash was over, they had to rebuild the SEC. And he's the one who rebuilt it, and they put new laws in it because they knew Europe had to reinvest back in the country. And which they did. And the problem was one of the companies that was targeted was owned by Blackjack Bouvier, who was Jackie Kennedy's father, and his uncle and his father, and they belonged to the Rothschilds. So there were a lot of very angry people over what went on. So when he became ambassador to England, he went over to Europe, and some people grabbed him before he went. They said, you're going over to Europe. We want you to tie up a few loose ends for us with some friends of ours over there. And the first guy he sat down with was the Shah of Iran, who was a gangster. And they put together a bank, and they lent money to Hitler because America wasn't in the war yet. And then when Hitler got that money, he came back to the same crew. He had another guy called Khashoggi, and they sold weapons to him. And England turned around and said, hey, man, you can't do that. You're an ambassador for the United States in our country. What are you doing? You're giving money and aid to our enemy. So they threw him out of England. And nobody ever said why he came home at the first place, because the newspapers were controlled by the Gore family in Indiana and Hearst out on the West Coast. And there was no television, so it was never divulged why he was thrown out of England. You understand?
Yeah, quick question, back up a bit. Jackie and John Kennedy, was that an arranged marriage?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Jackie's mother planned to get her money back from this guy because he caused her husband drank himself to death, Blackjack Bouvier. He was an Earl Flynn type guy. He was a real super individual, and when his company defunct it like that, he just put himself in a bottle and he killed himself. And she never forgave Joe Kennedy for that. She knew the story because of her husband. He told her the truth. So Joe Kennedy actually gave Jackie $10 million to stay in that marriage because her and Jack were both the same. They ran around each other chasing everything that ran down the street.
Okay. So what can you tell us about Dallas?
Well, the night before at Sam Murchison Jr.'s house, I was there. And I was sent there because I was supposed to play football for the Dallas Cowboys, and Slim Murchison Jr. owned the Cowboys and the stadium they played in. And his father was probably, in 1960, Clint Murchison Sr. was the wealthiest man in the world. And he was the head of the Mason's Lodge down in Texas, which was very powerful. So the kid had a great house in Dallas. It was like a ranch in the middle of the city. And he had this great party, and it was called Egyptian Nights. And the host of the party was J. Edgar Hoover. So I went there to see the people that were there and talk to some people. John McCoy was there, the banker from New York. Nixon was there. There was a bunch of people that were influential on certain things. And, when Johnson came back after 12 o'clock at night, they all went he just came back because Kennedy came into Fort Worth, and Johnson was there, and then he came back to the house party, and they went into a room, and boom, the secrecy all started, and people left the party. But the assassination of John Kennedy, it took them 3 months to reroute that thing down Dealey Plaza. And if you go down Dealey Plaza on the right-hand side, there was a cauldron in the street. You know what a cauldron is?
Like a sewage, right?
Yeah, in the curb of the street. Yeah,
they call it a rain.
Rain cauldron.
Storm sewer.
Yeah.
Storm sewer.
Yeah. Well, that storm sewer was big enough for me to walk down. It was big enough down there for me to walk down that right to the curb, to the river. Okay, so the first shot that came and hit Kennedy hit him in the throat, and it came from that cauldron. A guy named Johnny Roselli shot him.
Okay. And
there were 13 shots fired at Dealey Plaza that day. If you were going to kill Kennedy purposely from that place, at the window, like they said Oswald was at, it would be as the car came straight at the building. But they waited till it turned, went down a hill. The wind derelish in Dealey Plaza was so phenomenal that the police on the radios couldn't hear each other because it was just that windy. There were trees, there were signs. So you ask any marksman, if you're taking a mail order gun and bolt action, and you're, first of all, if I'm a marksman and I'm shooting a shot at that length of area, and I have to take in all the variables of the wind, the fact that the car is moving, it's going on a downgrade, and all the obstacles in place, and to put your heart at rest, it takes a sniper 60 seconds to put his heartbeat down because your pulse is in your finger. Yeah.
Hey, Jack, what about you? Were you ever in the military?
Oh, that's another story.
Because you were that age. They had the draft back then. What happened?
Well, that's another story.
All right, we'll come back and tell it again. Okay, go ahead.
But
you had to rest before you could shoot the gun.
So you have to arrest. Now, how do you shoot 3 shots in 28 seconds? You understand?
Right.
It's impossible. And have any accuracy with a mail order gun like that. And Oswald was not a crack marksman. He was all that bullarchy about him being on ranges and all. You understand there were 3 look-alike Oswald, and no one ever talks about this either. He was locked up in New Orleans and in Cuba at the same time on the same day. How could that happen? You understand?
Yeah.
There was a guy from the CIA out of the Bay of Pigs that looked just like Oswald. And he was the guy that was at the shooting range, and here he is at a shooting range, and he's shooting at the guy next to him's targets. And the guy said, "Hey, buddy, what do you think you're doing?" And he just jumped up. He said, "Don't you know who I am? I'm Lee Harvey Oswald," screaming it so that everyone would think Oswald spent a lot of time at a shooting range. Yeah. The thing was so well planned out, capped. And Oswald was a patsy.
Which Oswald was in Mexico?
The look-alike.
Okay.
He was in Cuba, actually.
No, Mexico. He went to the Mexican embassy in Mexico. Yeah.
Got locked up the same time, the same day.
Okay.
You're talking about a whole scenario of, the whole thing of Connally being shot first. Kennedy was actually shot 3 times that day. The bullet in his lower back they never talked about till 10 years later. He got shot 3 times that day. And the last shot was taken by the driver of the car. Rear. And he was a Secret Service guy who put that down in writing before he died. Yeah.
A lot of people, I know the story about the driver reaching around and shooting.
He did. That's Greer.
But when you look at those images now today, it's pretty much been discredited that there wasn't a gun in his hand.
That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. There was eight segments of that film, the Zapruder film, missing, and it's in there very plainly. That's why it was cut out.
So you want
the Zapruder film? The Zapruder film was Life magazine paid $150,000 for it, and it was never released for a year. And it was edited and everything right there in Texas. And guess who owned all the radio stations, AM, FM, all the newspapers? Everything was owned by the Murchison family. Mm-hmm. So the laboratory where the film was edited was owned by the Murchison family. Okay? And there were 8 frames taken out of it, of the original film.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, because you see people like Mike Wallace, Dan Rather, McNeil Lehrer. They were all local reporters, too, who were catapulted into these multi-million-dollar contracts for the rest
It's all about money, and it's all about you're talking. It was all BS, But it's all you're talking about something that's so contrived, and people took out of context so badly, and you're talking about the vehicle itself. The vehicle itself slowed down to 11 miles an hour and veered over to the left, cutting off the motorcycle guy. And if you look at the Zapruder film, you'll see the Secret Service guys peel back away from the car before the shooting, and then all of a sudden they all ran up forward. So now Zapruder himself was a white Russian who came into New York with his partner, and they were given $250,000 to go to start the clothing industry in Texas. All the elements involved, Ruby and everything, if you look at all the pieces and put it together, it all makes sense. The Byrd building was owned by H.L. Hunt. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and you got a window upstairs on the third floor where all the windows are open, people are walking around, and you have the President of the United States in an open car down below you. It never happened in our lifetime. And then you have all these people coming off a train, walking over a bridge, all these hobos, one of them being Woody Harrelson's father, who was a hitter for New Orleans.
And what about E. Howard Hunt?
What about him?
Do you think he was one of the hobos?
There were 32 people at Dealey Plaza that day that had the ability to assassinate somebody. There were 13 shots fired. And there's the Zapruder, who never had a camera in his hands before in his life, taking this footage with two women holding his legs because he suffered from vertigo.
Back to the shooters for a second. Frank Fiorini, was he there?
Who?
Frank Fiorini.
He was claimed to have been there.
Oh, Frank Sturgis, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I know you're talking about. But there were 32 people there that day that could have taken shots at people. Okay? So it was a lot of chaos. And they created that chaos for a reason. And so the whole thing is, and every couple of years more information comes out. Just like the third shot that hit Kennedy in the back. And the way that the whole thing happened, Connally got shot first. Kennedy gets shot in the throat. You see him reach up and grab his neck, and he falls forward. And then all of a sudden he goes shooting backwards, and the back of his head flies out. Yeah?
And Connally said, they're going to kill us all.
Well, not only that, but Jackie is trying to get out of the car,
right.
And they said no, she was trying to scrape his brains back. She thought she was getting killed too.
Joe Biden believes in the future of American manufacturing.
I don't buy for 1 second the vitality of American manufacturing is a thing of the past.
And his plan puts American workers first.
We will reward companies for creating good-paying jobs here at home, to deliver on the promise to buy American.
Joe Biden's economy will work for us.
We're going to make it happen with American determination and American union workers. I'm Joe Biden, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Biden for president.
You're invited to a huge grand opening celebration of Once Upon a Child in Sarasota this Thursday, September 24th through Sunday, September 27th. On Thursday and Friday, the first 25 customers get a free tote and a $10 gift card just for stopping by. Saturday, enjoy our live entertainment from 2 to 5, and Sunday, get double reward points all day long. Once Upon a Child Sarasota's grand opening is this Thursday through Sunday. Visit onceuponachildsarasota.com for more information and check us out on Facebook.
So she tried to get out of the car, and when she got out, they whispered in her ear, if you open your mouth and say one thing about anything you just witnessed, your children die. And she never said a word.
Yeah, I know. You don't even hear a recording of her voice after that. There was just
never said a word.
Just the conversation of her with Johnson on his tape recordings in the White House. But otherwise, you never really hear a recording of her voice after that time.
Well, there was an article, there was a discussion on the plane, and we won't even go into that. It's just the whole thing was a travesty. The people who did the autopsy in Texas were interns. That's all come out. The body was rushed out of. Now, here's the kicker for you, though. Here's something for you to think about. Who was the number one cop in the country when Jack Kennedy got killed?
No, what's his name? His brother, Bobby.
Yeah, he was the attorney general.
Yeah.
And his brother Bobby was